Watem here, welcome back to some more Umineko When Seagulls Cry. The closest I got to something happening in July 7th, 1129, is that the city of Tyre falls to the Venetian crusade after a siege of 19 weeks. Happened on July 7th, 1124 though. In terms of 1129, there was nothing. It was like July 24th in Asia, we had the former Emperor Shirakawa dies at his native Kyoto. Um, yeah, nothing else with dates at least um, in July. Well, a couple of people dying, but yeah. Emperor of Japan and Emperor of the Song Dynasty died within 4 days of each other. Anyway, back to Umineko and They Cry. The inside of the pile was much more important. Let's continue. This morning, behind each of the doors with a magic circle drawn on them, had been the body of a victim. So, if something new had been added to this door, does that mean something new has been added inside the parlour? When Aunt Eva tried to open it, she felt the resistance of the lock. She immediately took out the master key and put it in the keyhole. As soon as she opened the door, Aunt Eva let out a high-pitched scream and ran inside. That alone was enough to tell us what had happened inside the room. Dr. Nanjo and I looked at each other, and I shook my head slightly as we entered the parlour.
Georgie! Georgie! しっかりして! Georgie! Nanjo sensei, 早く!
George Aniki lay there crumpled alongside Shannon Chan's corpse. The chest was stained bright red, and judging by his still opened eyes, I'd hate to say it to Aunt Eva, but I couldn't pick up any signs of life. After moving to take George's pulse, Dr. Nanjo shook his head, wordlessly reporting that George was dead. Brushing him aside, Aunt Eva once again crouched beside George Aniki and started crying at the top of her lungs. With Aniki's death, one thing is certain. Murders hadn't ended on 8th Twilight. The Epitaph was being carried out in its complete form, including the 9th Twilight, and none shall be left alive. I was really starting to lose track of things. For some reason, Aunt Eva's half-crazed cries were actually made me cool down. Crestfallen and exhausted, I flopped onto the sofa and plugged my feet on top of the table. Maybe all these murders numbed my heart. Instead of just being frightened, I felt completely confused. Dad and Kirie-san are dead, and the people have been killed off one by one, starting with the servants. There's been a hell of a lot of them by now. I don't know when the first murder happened, but they might have been killed at a rate of about 1 person per hour by now. We believe that the boat will come for us around 9 tomorrow. There's still a full 12 hours until then. How many more sacrifices to which will there have to be for us to survive? With the 4 of us, if one goes each hour, we won't last any longer than 4 hours. Wow, maths! We don't even know if we'll last until midnight tonight. Yesterday, after lunch, we came into this parlour. Just as they started talking about serving some tea Aunt Rosa had bought, we kids decided to take a walk. Maria was jumping around, wasn't she? Didn't Shannon bring us some cookies? She said Kumasawa had baked them, or something. It would have been hilarious if she'd baked some mackerel into them, wouldn't it? That's right. I'll never hear Kumasawa-chan's mackerel jokes again, will I? Oh, right. If I only remember stuff about Kumasawa-chan, that wouldn't be fair to everyone else. Why did Dad and Kirie-san even go outside? It's not like going without food for a day would kill us. So why did gluttony get a hold of them and make them go out for food? I'll bet that fearless dad of mine just started complaining about being hungry. Kirie-san, you were supposed to be the brakes for my reckless dad. Why didn't you stop him? And what about your daughter, Anja? She's still just 6 years old. Don't tell me you plan to leave her in my care. After all, it's doubtful now whether I'll even be able to leave this island alive. I don't think she's really been mentioned all that much in the previous one, so why now, this time?
やめなさい。こんな時に争ってどうするんですか。ジェシカさん、やめなさい。
It's been kind of noisy for a while. By the time I looked up to see what it was, Jessica and Danteva had suddenly started fighting each other. No, maybe I should say that Jessica was grabbing at Danteva.
エヴァおばさんが父さんたちを殺したんだ。他に説明がつかない。何をバカなことを。あんたのお父さんたちなんか知るわけないでしょ。ゲストハウスの1階にいたのは誰だよ。エヴァおばさんだ。1階のロビーには父さんと母さんと、そしてエヴァおばさんがいた。生き残ったのは誰だ。エヴァおばさんだけだ。どうして。あんたが犯人だからに決まってるじゃないか。父さんと母さんを殺して外へ運び出して白々しく鍵を閉めて魔女の仕業なんかを装いやがったんだ。じゃあジョージはどうしていなくなったのよ。
Because he saw you do it.
1階には降りてきてないのよ。じゃあ2階でいなくなったっていうの。2階には誰がいたのよ。あなたたちがいたんじゃない。あなたは知ってたんでしょ。ジョージがこっそりゲストハウスを抜け出すのを。それを自分は何も知らないような顔を抜け抜けと。あんたがジョージを止めててくれれば、ジョージは
やめなさいというのに、ジェシカさんはずっといとこ部屋にいました。そしてエヴァさんもずっと1階のロビーにいました。そして2人とも何も悪くない。ただ家族を失って悲しいだけなんです。犯人なんか誰もいない。どこにもいない。ただただ魔女のせいなだけなんです。だからお二人で憎み合うのはやめなさい。
The witch's fault, huh? I wonder if that's a good way to cool down with the situation right now. Yeah, I finally understand why 3 people evaporated from the guest house when all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. This is what they were after, making us think the culprit was inside, and sparking this ugly mutual hatred. Let's be the culprit's, the witch's goal. But if that's the case, how did the culprit lock it from the outside? When Dad's group was attacked, the master key was definitely stolen. Ah, but the doors and windows to the guest house were built so that you couldn't lock them from the outside, no matter how hard you tried. So a master key should have had nothing to do with the guest house closed room. Jessica and Aunt Eva were turning their sadness at losing their blood relatives into anger at the person in front of them. Dr. Nanja was trying to step between them. And I sat on the sofa, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about things that didn't even matter anymore with a worn-out expression. I just couldn't believe this was the same parlour that had been so warm and pleasant midday yesterday. For just a short time before the typhoon hit. The sudden sound of a gunshot shook me out of my half-asleep trance. Smoke was rising out of the barrel of the gun Aunt Eva held. Jessica had fallen to the floor and was covering both of her eyes. Did Dr. Nanja get shot, maybe? Aunt Eva and Dr. Nanja were looking down at her in shock.
大丈夫ですか、ジェシカさん。
Okay.
ジェシカさん。
私のせいじゃないわよ。あんたがよせっていうのに突っかかってくるから。
おいおい、どうしたってんだ。何事なんだ。
So, did Jessica grab at Aunt Eva, who had turned which turned into a scuffle? Did they start fighting over Aunt Eva's gun? Did some kind of impact cause the trigger to be pulled? I didn't know if a bullet had grazed her, if she'd been burned by the discharge, but either way, Jessica was covering both of her eyes, screaming, "It hurts, and rolling around on the floor.
大丈夫、落ち着いて。大した怪我ではありませんぞ。気をしっかり。
目が痛い。見えない。
Dr. Nanjo let Jessica borrow his shoulder, saying that he would tend to her in the servant room. The servant room in this mansion had a bed and first aid kit and was able to function as an infirmary.
父さんと母さんの仇殺してやる。殺してやる。私じゃないわよ。私じゃない。
ジェシカさん、傷に触りますから、それ以上騒がないで。さあ、使用人室に行きましょう。
Jessica continued to curse Aunt Eva as her parents' murderer. It seemed that Aunt Eva couldn't conceal her trembling at the fact that she had pulled the trigger, even if it had been an accident.
私のせいじゃないわよ。あの子が掴みかかってきたからこんなことに。
That kid?
私は殺してなんかないわよ。それよりジョージは誰が殺したの？そうよ、ジョージは誰が殺したのよ。ジョージ、ジョージ。私は悪くない。私は悪くない。
待てよエヴァおばさん、一人になるな。
I didn't know if it was because Aunt Eva couldn't bear her mistake, or if she'd given up control of her body to anger at the person who killed her only son, or if it was both of those all mixed together. At any rate, she ran out into the corridor, yelling, fearful and screaming. I was also worried about Jessica's condition. Right then, I couldn't leave Aunt Eva alone. How would she go off on her own in this mansion, of all places? Is she suicidal? Possibly. Dr. Nanjo took Jessica towards the servant room. I chased after Aunt Eva, dashing into the depths of the mansion. After sitting Jessica on the servant room bed, Nanjo told her several times not to touch her eyes and examined the affected area. The barrel had probably been near her eyes. There was a possibility that the flames from the discharge had injured her corneas. There was no threat to her life, but it would probably be necessary to take her to a doctor as soon as possible. Nanjo applied emergency first aid, covering the affected area with gauze and wrapping it with a bandage. As a result, Jessica completely lost her field of vision.
いいですかな。傷が痛んだりうずいたりするでしょうが、絶対にかいたり揉んだりしてはなりませんぞ。明日になったらすぐに眼科の先生のところへ行きましょう。
あいつね、本当は私を殺すつもりだったんだ。ほんのちょっと角度が悪かったら今頃殺されてた。絶対にあいつを警察へ突き出してやる。
エヴァさんはそんなことはしませんぞ。あれは事故です。
事故なもんか。あいつが父さんと母さんを殺したんだ。この島には19人目も魔女もいるわけがない。
It's easy enough for a 19th person to exist.
あいつが全ての犯人なんだ。ゲストハウスの1階にはあいつだけがいた。父さんと母さんを殺し、それを見てしまったジョージ兄さんも口封じに殺したに違いない。じいさまや使用人の人たちだってそうさ。きっとあいつは夕べの親族会議の途中でこっそり抜け出し、みんなを殺したに違いない。
もしそうならば、警察が調べればすぐにわかることです。警察はすごいですぞ。鑑識の手にかかればわからぬことなどありません。
Sure.
私たちは誰かを疑ったり恨んだりする必要などないのです。 全て警察が解決してくれます。だからジェシカさんは今は体を休め、目を楽にすることに専念するのです。あまり眉間にシワを寄せては目にはもちろん美容にもよくありませんぞ。
When Jessica's abusive ever had reached a crescendo, she actually had started glaring instinctively, and the pressure on her eyes had hurt her. Jessica herself realized that the more she talked, the more the wound would hurt. And regardless of whether she had overcome her suspicions as ever, she regained her composure for the time being.
あいつが殺したんだ。父さんや母さん、シャロンやカノン君を。
She'd heard that Cannon had been killed in the chapel. Jessica still hadn't seen his face after he had died. Jessica was now less fearful about the fact that she was blinded, and more frightened that the police would carry Cannon's body away how she still couldn't see, and that she would have to say her final farewell without being able to look at his face. Her anger at the culprit and her sadness at the death of the person she'd liked. Those mixed emotions started her crying. But right now, tears were actually painful for her, and so causes more crying, so she wasn't even permitted to leisurely remember his face in bygone days. Jessica could do nothing but sit on the bed and let her head droop, withstanding the pain.
さて、今度はエヴァさんの方が心配です。気に病まれていなければいいのですが。
Realizing that Jessica had calmed down for the time being and letting out a sigh, he stuck his head out into the hallway to look for any signs of the others coming back. Oh. Then their eyes met. Nanjo, unable to understand who this person was bewildered for an instant.
視力を失った人間って反魔法力も対魔法抵抗力もゼロになるんですってつまり今のあんたはアイソレーテッドポーン意味がわかるかしら
なんですと
Nanjo had no way of understanding who the person in front of him was, much less what she had said. Or just said.
南條先生どうしたんです
Unable to see, Jessica had to rely on voices alone to make out the situation. But since she heard Nanjo say something in an uneasy tone, she tightened up, thinking that something bad might have happened.
やめてくれ殺さないでくれわしには病弱の孫がおるここでは死ねんのだ頼む見逃してくれ
南條先生南條先生
Jessica couldn't do anything except call out from the bed. Judging by the tone of his voice, Nanjo was in the corridor, confronting someone. And he was scared. His life must have been threatened just a second ago.
よせやめろ
第9の晩に魔女はよみがえり誰も生き残れはしない
The witch pointed the end of her gold staff at Nanjo. Even though he didn't know what she was planning to do, Nanjo assumed that she must be trying to take his life.
南條先生南條先生そこに誰がいるんだよ返事をしろよ
やめてくれ
Bang! Interesting. Sharp sound echoed. And just as sharply, the tip of the golden staff tapered and stretched, slicing into Nanjo's forehead. Jessica, who could only try to grasp what was happening with her ears, had no clue what was going on. But even so, she was able to realize that with that sound, Nanjo had died. And she could tell that the person was now in the corridor, right in front of the servant room. Furthermore, since she couldn't see, she wouldn't be able to run away, much less resist. Knowing that she was a mouse in a trap and in a life or death situation, Jessica shuddered.
ああ、ジェシカ。かわいそうにね。目を怪我しちゃったのね。なら、あなたは逃げることもできないわね。今から南條の死体でたっぷり遊ぶわ。それに飽きたら、次はあなたを殺してたっぷり遊んであげる。いいえ、せっかく目が見えないんだもの。殺してからだけじゃない。殺す前にもたっぷり遊んであげるわね。そこでしばらく震えながら待ってなさいね。南條の死体で私がどんな風に遊ぶのかをたっぷり想像しながら。
Jessica was struck with fear and let out a frail scream. She wanted to scream in a much louder voice, trying to get someone to help her, but she couldn't. When faced with true fear, it clogs up a person's throat. Right then, Jessica could barely even breathe. She searched around with her hands, trying to find some way to escape. But even though she should have known this room well, just being unable to see it made it like a closed room of darkness. She ran into a shelf or something, and things like candy jars and bottles fell down, hitting her on the head. As she was now, it would have been tough for her to even guard her head to block it. She was painfully aware of how powerless humans became just by losing their sense of sight. Of course, she had no time to be impressed by this fact. She crawled around at random, trying to escape from that place. But she kept bumping into things that she didn't understand, getting hit by various falling objects. And it felt like the entire room was alive, bullying her and refusing to let her escape. Then, a footstep could be heard from that presence in the hallway. And then a voice. She probably poked her head into the room, since Jessica had been so loud.
賑やかね。レディーならおとなしくベッドに座って待っていなさい。
Can't find for bed anymore.
令状にふさわしい素敵な真っ赤な死に装束を与えてやるんだから。あなたを見つけた人が失神してしまいそうになるくらいのね。
Until just a second ago, she had sworn that she'd killed the culprit if she found one. However, she was now very powerless. She couldn't do anything except let out a scream, crawling around on the floor and bumping her head into the bed and the legs of desks.
助けて！助けて！誰か助けて！父さん、母さん、パートナー、誰か来てよ！助けてよ！カノ君。
In the corridor, as the witch thought of how to toy with Nanja's life, a single gold butterfly secretly watched that scene from the corner of the hallway. Beatrice? Beatrice? It was Berto, who had barely escaped with her life once before. The gold butterfly softly returned to human form. It was faint and transparent, like a lace curtain. By now, her power was so weak that even maintaining this form was difficult for her. Right next to her, Renove also appeared.
ジェシカも生き残れはしないでしょう。もとより誰も生き残れはしませんが。
あやつはカノンに恋心を寄せておった。わらわはそれをもてあそんだこともある。しかしそれは 魔女として恥ずべきことであった。
愛とは一なる元素。恋心はそれ以上に純粋で尊いものでございます。なぜかお嬢様はとてもそれを嫌われますが。
Her own jealousy?
お
Perhaps?
師匠様は言った。魔法とは人を幸せにするためにあるとな。わらわもかつてはそれを知っていたはずだった。そしてそれを忘れた時から、だからわらわはバトラの対戦相手の資格を失っていたのだ。
まさかお嬢様、ジェシカを助けるおつもりですか。危険です。
分かっておる。どうせ助けても黄金鏡の扉が開けば魔女の宴の慰み者よ。しかしそれでもあやつの殺し方に比べれば数段慈悲深い。魔女の宴は恐るべき方法にて命を奪うが、二度は奪わぬ。生死をもてあそばぬ。しかしあやつは違う。
Just like you once were, torturing Bachelor multiple times between games.
何度でも殺す。面白半分で殺す。そこにはわずかほどの慈悲もない。わらわはせめてジェシカをそのような残酷な運命から。
確かにそれを行うことは良き魔女として称えられることでしょう。しかし新しきベアトリーチェ様はすでにお嬢様のことを敵視なされています。もう一度姿を見られることがあったなら、今度は逃れる術はありませんよ。
ジョージをシャノンに合わせた時、わらわはようやく魔女とはどういうものなのか、そして魔法とはどういうものなのかを。わらわは魔女だ。魔女であらねばならぬ。そしてバトラに対戦相手だと認められ、今度こそバトラに魔女だと認めさせなければならぬのだ。そのための道は長く険しいかもしれない。しかし今ここでその一歩を踏み出さねば、わらわは魔女を名乗れぬのだ。
お気持ちはわかりますが、どうやってお救いになるつもりです？今のお嬢様の身に使える魔法は多くありません。シャノンを蘇らせる時ですらジョージの力を借りたではありませんか。
うん。だからこそジェシカだけは救えるかもしれぬのだ。
Help guide Jessica to save herself, or at least it won't need to
今あ
be.
やつはカノンに助けを求めている。
No?
その思いの力を借りれば、わらわの魔力にてもう一度冥府の扉を叩けるかもしれない。
You're going straight to the lands of dead again?
叩けはするでしょう。しかし魔力を使い切ります。新しきベアトリーチェ様にもし見つかったら本当に逃れる術はありませんよ。私はすでにお嬢様の執事ではありません。いざという時お助けすることはできませんのでご了承を。
承知しておるわ。わらわはこれまで数えることもできぬほどの命をもてあそび奪ってきた。ならばその罪は同じ数だけの命を救うことでしかあがないぬのかもしれん。もとよりわらわに失うものなどないわ。名も魔力も引き継ぎ、今や魔女とも認められぬただの黄金の蝶よ。
バトラ様はどうなさるのですか？ゲームの途中です。彼はお嬢様がお戻りになるまで待つとおっしゃいました。 ここで果てるようなことがあっても良いのですか。お嬢様にはマトラ様の向かいの席に戻る義務があるのですよ。
だからこそだ。わらわにしか救えぬ命があるならば、わらわはそれを救う。
And on that note, I will be ending it there for today. I think I've probably still got another episode's worth of time left, I think. In any case, I hope you've all enjoyed. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments. And until next time, see ya.